In 1929, workers renovating a palace in Istanbul cracked open a storage room that hadn't been touched in centuries. Inside, buried under dust, rolled in linen, was a map. A map drawn in 1513. And here's the problem. That map showed Antarctica. Not a guess, not a myth, not a vague smear at the bottom of the page. A coastline, detailed, proportioned, accurate enough that 20th century cartographers compared it to modern satellite imaging and went quiet. Antarctica was not discovered until 1820. That's a 307-year gap. So I need you to stay with me for the next 15 minutes, because what I'm about to show you doesn't just raise questions about one old map. It raises questions about everything we think we know about the history of exploration, about ancient civilizations, about who was sailing this planet, and how, long before we gave them credit. This is the Piri Reis map. Let's start with the man. Because Piri Reis was not some eccentric monk scribbling fantasies in a monastery. He was not a folk artist. He was not making things up. Piri Reis, full name Hasai Ahmed Muhyiddin Piri, was an Ottoman admiral, one of the most decorated naval commanders of the early 16th century. He fought in some of the most strategically critical naval battles in Mediterranean history, including the Ottoman campaign against Venice and the conquest of Egypt under Sultan Selim I. He was also a cartographer of the highest order, not as a hobby, as a military intelligence function. Maps in the Ottoman Empire were state secrets. They were power. Knowing coastlines, currents, depths, and ports meant controlling trade. Controlling trade meant controlling empires. Piri Reis spent decades collecting charts. Obsessively, systematically, he compiled a work called the Kitab-i-Barii, the Book of Navigation, which contained over 200 maps of ports and coastlines, so precise that European captains reportedly sought out copies. This man knew what he was doing. And in 1513, just 21 years after Columbus reached the Americas, he sat down and assembled what would become the most controversial map in human history. He drew it on gazelle skin, in ink and gold. The full map measured roughly 90 by 65 centimeters, not large by modern standards, but what it contained was staggering. The map showed the Atlantic Ocean, the western coasts of Europe and Africa, accurate to within a fraction of a degree, the eastern coastline of South America, remarkably detailed for 1513, the Caribbean islands, and at the bottom, a landmass. A continuous landmass stretching along the bottom of the map, ice-free, with mountain ranges, river systems, bays, and peninsular features. A landmass that matches, in structure and position, the coast of Antarctica. Now here's where serious researchers start paying very close attention. And here's where most YouTube videos stop doing their homework, so let's go deeper. In the bottom corner of the map, Piri Reis himself wrote a series of notes. They're called the Portolan Notes, navigational annotations, and in those notes he explains his sources. He writes that the map was compiled from approximately 20 source charts. Some of those charts, he says, dated back to the time of Alexander the Great. Some were charts he captured from Spanish sailors, including, reportedly, charts originally used by Christopher Columbus himself on his voyages. Think about what that means. Columbus's charts, charts that Columbus used, charts that Columbus may have gotten from somewhere before he sailed. The question isn't just, how did Piri Reis know about Antarctica? The question is, where did his sources get that information? In 1960, a retired American naval officer named Captain Lorenzo Burroughs forwarded a copy of the Piri Reis map to the cartography department at the U.S. Air Force's Strategic Air Command. He wanted a professional opinion. What he got back was a letter, now famous in alternative history circles, from a Lieutenant Colonel Harold Z. Ohlmeyer. The letter stated, and I'm paraphrasing carefully here, that the geographical detail shown in the lower portion of the map was consistent with the sub-glacial topography of Antarctica. Meaning, the coastline shown wasn't what Antarctica looks like today, covered in ice. It matched what Antarctica looks like under the ice. That sub-glacial topography wasn't mapped by humans until the 1950s, using seismic surveys, under the International Geophysical Year program. The map from 1513 appeared to show a coastline that we only confirmed existed in the 20th century. Now, I want to be honest with you, because this channel doesn't do sensationalism without rigor. There are serious mainstream scholars who dispute the Antarctica interpretation. Some argue the southern landmass is a speculative addition based on the classical Greek theory of a terra australis, a hypothetical southern continent that ancient philosophers believed must exist to balance the northern landmasses. That's a real debate. But here's what those scholars struggle to explain. The features on the Piri Reis southern landmass aren't random, they're specific. There are what appear to be river deltas, mountain elevations, a peninsula that correlates roughly with what we now call the Antarctic Peninsula. You don't get that level of specificity from philosophical speculation. Something was used as a source, and we don't know what it was. Let's go back to those source charts, because this is the part that nobody talks about, and it is the most important part. Piri Reis was working in Constantinople, modern Istanbul, the intellectual capital of the Islamic world, and at that time, the most sophisticated archival center on Earth. The Ottoman Empire had absorbed the libraries of Byzantine Constantinople, the accumulated knowledge of Arab scholars, and the navigational records of every maritime power it had conquered. If ancient maps existed, maps predating Greek civilization, maps from civilizations we've never adequately catalogued, they would most likely have passed through Constantinople. Now here's what makes the source chart problem so explosive. The Piri Reis map shows both North and South America with a level of accuracy that shouldn't be possible for 1513. Columbus had only reached the Caribbean. Amerigo Vespucci had only partially charted the South American coast. The full continental shape of the Americas would not be established for decades. Yet the map shows the correct longitude of the South American eastern coastline. This is critical. Longitude was the great unsolvable problem of Renaissance navigation. It wasn't reliably calculable until the marine chronometer was invented in the 18th century. John Harrison's H4 chronometer, the breakthrough device, was built in 1759. Piri Reis drew a map with accurate longitude in 1513. Professor Charles Hapgood, a historian at Keene State College who studied this map extensively in the 1960s, concluded that the source charts had to have been made using a sophisticated spherical trigonometry projection, the kind of mathematical framework that didn't formally exist in European cartography until much later. His conclusion, which he published in his book Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings, was that the source charts originated with a civilization of advanced maritime capability, a civilization that we have either forgotten or deliberately overlooked. Now Hapgood is a controversial figure. Mainstream academia largely dismissed him, and to be fair, some of his broader theories went further than the evidence supported. But here's what's interesting. Albert Einstein wrote the foreword to one of Hapgood's books. Albert Einstein, the man who rewrote physics, took time to write an endorsement for a cartographic historian, arguing that ancient civilizations had mapped the Earth. Einstein called the hypothesis of great importance to everything that touches on the history of the Earth's surface. Modern institutions, the Library of Congress, the Topkapi Palace Museum in Istanbul where the map is housed, acknowledge the map's existence. They display it, they call it remarkable. But ask them to explain the southern continent, the accurate longitude, the sub-glacial coastline correlation. The answer is always the same. Further study is needed. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The Piri Reis map doesn't fit neatly into our accepted timeline of exploration and cartographic development. And when something doesn't fit the timeline, institutions face a choice: revise the timeline or minimize the anomaly. Minimizing is easier. The map is real. It's not a forgery. It's been authenticated by materials analysis, ink composition, and corroborating Ottoman records. Piri Reis is real. His credentials are unimpeachable by any historical standard. The anomalies are real: the Antarctica correlation, the longitude accuracy, the source chart references. What is not real is a clean, satisfying consensus explanation. Think about what would have to be true for this map to exist. Option 1, Piri Reis assembled source charts from ancient, possibly preclassical maritime civilizations who had explored the entire planet, including Antarctica, before the last great ice age shift around 10,000 BCE. Those civilizations passed their knowledge through intermediary cultures, possibly Phoenician, possibly Arab, possibly lost entirely, until fragments reached Constantinople. That theory requires us to accept the existence of a sophisticated ancient civilization we have no other confirmed record of. Option 2, Piri Reis guessed, or his sources guessed, and by extraordinary coincidence, the guesses matched sub-glacial topographic features that we couldn't confirm until the 20th century. That theory requires us to accept a coincidence, so statistically improbable it borders on impossible. There is no option 3, no institution has offered one. And that silence, that gap between what the map shows and what anyone can explain, is the most interesting thing about it. Let me put this in a larger frame for a moment. Human history as we teach it is a timeline, a confident, organized progression. Primitive tool use, agriculture, city-states, classical civilizations, the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, the Age of Exploration. The Piri Reis map suggests that progression may have a gap in it, a gap we haven't acknowledged. We know that catastrophic events reshape civilizations. We know the Younger Dryas period, a rapid climate shift around 10,800 BCE, caused massive disruption across the northern hemisphere. Sea levels rose dramatically as glaciers melted. Coastlines that were once inhabited are now underwater. We know this. What we don't know, what we have carefully avoided asking too loudly, is whether the civilizations that existed before that event were more sophisticated than we assume. The Piri Reis map is one of several anomalies that point in that direction. There are others. Göbekli Tepe, the 12,000-year-old temple complex in Turkey that predates Stonehenge by 7,000 years, built with astronomical precision we still can't fully explain. The Antikythera mechanism, a Greek device so complex it functioned as an analog computer for astronomical calculation, with no known technological precursors. The precise geographic orientation of megalithic structures across multiple continents, built by cultures with no documented contact with each other. Each one alone is a curiosity. Together they form a pattern. And the Piri Reis map sits at the center of that pattern, concrete, dated, authenticated, and unexplained. I want to be clear about what I'm not saying. I'm not saying ancient astronauts made this map. I'm not saying there was an Atlantis with electricity and Wi-Fi. I'm not asking you to believe anything that isn't supported by evidence. What I am saying is this. The Piri Reis map exists, the anomalies are real, the institutional silence is real, and the honest, intellectually courageous position, the position that actual science demands, is to say, we don't fully know and that not knowing should drive us to look harder. The history of exploration is not over, it is being rewritten, right now, by underwater archaeologists surveying submerged coastlines, by geologists rereading ancient sediment layers, by cartographers digitizing manuscripts that haven't been opened in 400 years. The map is sitting in Istanbul's Topkapi Palace Museum. You can go see it. It is roughly the size of a coffee table. It is drawn on gazelle skin by a man who died in 1553. And nobody can fully explain what's on it. That's either the most unsettling thing you've heard today, or it's the most exciting. Either way, you needed to know it. If this video made you think differently about history, hit subscribe, because this is one of 50 rabbit holes we're going down this year, and some of them go much, much deeper than this one. Drop in the comments, do you think the southern landmass is Antarctica, or is there another explanation? I read every single one. I'll see you in the next one.